All right, so I'm going to start coming that way. So, the amazing Sarah Kuhn is the author of the Heroine Complex series, woo! And recently announced Batgirl. She will be writing Cassandra Cain's story. And then next coming down the line is Ashley Poston. Ashley is the author of the acclaimed Geekerella and the series, the sci-fi epic, amazing, I need the second book right now, Heart of Iron, and its next book, Soul of Stars.
You are so nice, thank you.
So good. Can I have the book?
I heart you.
I heart you.
I stand you so much.
And then we have Preeti Chhibber, who is repping from Desi Geek Girls, sci-fi, and has an amazing story in the anthology, 1,000 Beginnings and Endings. Next up is Danika Stone, also known as Jane Firefly. Danika is the author of All the Feels and Internet Famous. And we have Akela Cooper, who is written and produced on Luke Cage and American Horror Story. And we have Marley Zarcone from Shade, the Changing Girl. Yeah. And I'm your moderator. My name is CB Lee. I write the Sidekick Squad series, and that is me. Thank you all for being here, and thank you guys. I hope you're having a great, amazing Comic-Con, and thank you for coming to our panel. We're going to be talking about fandom and geekery, and we're going to start off with a question. We'll do the style. We're not going to go down the line. Our style is you can popcorn in when you feel like it, and feel free to chat in and chat with each other. It flows. So tell me about what does being a geek mean to you?
Start. For me, and I think this is why we started Desi Geek Girls, is that Swapna, Krishna, and I wanted a space to talk about what we liked. And that's what being a geek is. Like, you love what you love wholeheartedly, and I think you also recognize the problems. But that's okay. It doesn't mean you love it any less. And for us, it was being a geek within our very specific cultural perspective that mattered, and pulling all of your lived experience into it.
And like being a geek to me is also being a fangirl, because like they're kind of synonymous. They're one and the same. Being a geek girl and being a fangirl. It's kind of like you like operate in the exact same space. It's just the names are interchangeable to me.
I think for me, being a geek used to be this really negative thing that I spent all of high school trying to deny, even though I was hanging out with my best friend and we were watching Doctor Who in his basement. Okay, but the older I've gotten, the more I just embrace it as this badge of honor. Like, being a geek is loving things to a point that you're willing to express that to the world. And I think, honestly, the world needs more of that. We have so much apathy. I love being a person who cares so much that I will totally build this cosplay and wear it everywhere, even though I'm dying from the heat. I love that.
For me, I think it's all of those things, definitely, and also having a level of passion for something that kind of borders on obsession that sometimes to the outside world might appear slightly unhealthy, but is actually super awesome when you can sort of connect with other people who have the same thing. So when I was younger, I grew up in a really small town. I didn't have a lot of like nerdy friends around. The internet wasn't really like what it is now. And I was obsessed with Deep Space Nine, and I didn't know anyone else who liked it as much as me, except for like one person in high school. We tried to form a fan club, but it was just two of us. And it was two people's a fan club. And so I ended up sending away for this like newsletter, like this major Kira like stapled together newsletter. And it was sort of this point of connection outside of that very small town that made me feel like I was not alone. So I think that like being a geek for me means having that level of obsession and then being able to find those other people who can match you and will make you feel less alone.
I was lucky in that I was raised by geeks. So like I came from a household was like my dad was into comic books, my mom was into sci-fi movies, and that's just like that was my life. So I didn't have the understanding that's like, oh, this is weird or wrong. And I actually did come up with the advent of the internet. So I got to experience like the fandom community outside. It's like, oh, other people like the X-Files and they like Deep Space Nine and Star Trek. And when I have my little hour in school, and I find a chat room and like chat with people about the episodes that I'd seen. So I was lucky in that regard. It's like I was always surrounded by geekdom. I guess you could say I was born into it.
Yeah, that's the same. That was my connection to my father, you know, and young. That's where he's the one who got me into comics and would bring me to the store all the time. And he's the one who told me, like, you can't read Preacher. Like, and then, of course, I read Preacher. So, but, you know, it
is wonderful when they're like, don't read this.
No.
Like, my father grew up, like, he would read heavy metal. And I don't know if any of you remember Omni Magazine or 1984, but those are not necessarily appropriate for children. And there was one day where my dad was just like, don't read. It was an issue of 1984. He's like, don't read that. And I was like, okay. And then he just walked away and left it there on the table. It's like,
So did you read it?
yes, I did. Immediately, the second he was downstairs, it's like, what in this am I not supposed to see?
it's almost like he set it up on purpose.
Yeah,
He's like, I don't want you to read this.
It's that reverse psychology.
So, do you remember what it was?
I remember the cover of it was, and this is maybe a part of the discussion. It was a woman who was like strapped naked to a bomb that was being shot into space. What the story was, no, I don't remember. I just remember the cover, and I remember there were boobs. Probably very sexually suggestive material, but like I can't remember how old I was. It's probably like 10 or 11. It's like all of that stuff just kind of went over my head. So I was just like looking at this like, okay, boobs. He doesn't want me to. We've seen boobs before. But my parents didn't really have, you know, anything against like the naked human body. So I was like, what is in it? It was just me just like sitting on the floor. What in this?
You're like, what's the story? What's the story behind the boobs? I have to know.
The story of the boobs is that they're akimbo, obviously. They breasted boobly down the stairs.
Yeah. That really, actually, the breasted boobly down the stairs. This is actually from a satire piece written kind of to mock how certain writers how they write women, you know, with a focus on their sexuality. And we're going to come back to the geek experience, but since we came on this tangent, what do you think about the representation of women within nerd culture? Do you feel like that has influenced how people within the community treat other women?
I think it's evolved a lot.
Oh, very much so.
Massively. I've been in comics, drawing comics for, you know, like 15 years, and you know, I'm finally getting to the point where I'm a DC professional, but it's just the amount of women who are involved and a part of the community. The community's growing. There's negativity still, but it's just, it feels overwhelming because it was just, you know, there was always women in comics. You know, there was always Wendy and, you know, Wendy Peeney and stuff. It just massive amounts of women who were involved, but it didn't feel like part of it. It just felt like we were intruding on, or people made it feel like we were intruding, but we weren't. We were always there.
When you say we were, are you talking about you as a writer?
As an artist, yeah. I mean, when my first interning gig was in a house with 7 guys. So, yeah, it was gross. But, you know. And I, you know, lived there for a year and worked, and it's still, you know, I was accepted, but I still felt like my perspective is weird to add. And it evolved where I became comfortable with what I do and being, you know, a woman who's contributing a voice to comics. So.
Yeah, my experience is on the TV side and just starting out as like a young writer. And it's like there are levels, and so basically the entry is staff writer, and just having the experience of like being the lone woman in the room. It's like, can we not rape her?
Yeah.
Like, because you would be amazed. Like, that is a go-to storyline for a lot of shows with male leads. And
I don't think we're amazed.
no, you guys
Right?
so many shows, so many times. Like,
So many
can we not
shows.
do this? And then there was one show, will not name, but like I was getting upset, and at that point I was a mid-level writer, so I was kind of feeling myself. It's like, oh no, I have earned this title. I was like, well, you know what? If you really, really, really want to rape, why don't we change it to a dude?
Yeah.
And that shut the room down. It's like, oh, all of a sudden you're not interested in like doing the storyline that you're going to do with a female rape and a male rape. Okay, then let's just not do the rape.
Interesting.
Huh. I wonder where that comes from.
Yeah.
Well, I think also in terms of like, I don't know, the perception of women in geekdom or like portrayals of women in geekdom, I do think it has changed a lot. And I think one of the game changers for me was just, I guess, mostly on Twitter, finally connecting with other women who love comic books, because I think a lot of us grew up sort of maybe being the only one, or you know, like the only girl in the comic book store, or the only girl in the comic book club, or whatever. And that, I think, sort of fed into a lot of the portrayals in geek media, where whenever you had a geek girl, it was always this very, like, male gaze, like, she's a prize, she's, like, a side piece, or she's the girl with the glasses who takes them off, and then suddenly she's a supermodel. You know, obviously that wasn't a lot of our experience. Like, I wrote my first novella, which was was about this, like, kind of aggressive, like, a little bit mean, obsessive geek girl, because I was like, this isn't the reality. All the geek girls that I know will get in there and fight about X-Men continuity, like, just as much as the guys. And they're not really thinking about, like, if they're beautiful and don't know it. They're not really thinking about if they're breasting boobily. They're not really thinking about they can take off their glasses and take out the bun and they look amazing. Like, they're just as much of fans as guys. And so I think once we started, like, coming together in the community, like online, and then finally being able to find each other in these spaces and at conventions, it kind of changed, and, like, I think gave some of us more of the freedom to start creating those characters too, where it was like, actually, we've been here the whole time. We're just as obsessed with as guys are, and we actually don't care that much what guys think of us, except that they keep trying to, you know, say that we're not geeks or keep us out.
But it does seem like there are two communities right now. Yeah, I used to co-host a podcast called O Comics, and my co-host was, he's a great guy, but he was a white guy, and he came over from iFanboy, and so he brought a lot of his listeners over, and the just horrible things that were said about me because I wasn't the right kind of fan. So I agree, like, I went on, you know, on Twitter, I really found, like, that community of women and women of color who are total geeks, but there is still this, like, it's almost like two circles where the other circle is, like, so angry that we exist.
They feel like we invaded
Yes.
their it's like, you're in my clubhouse. Like, it's not, you can come into my clubhouse, but you're not really a part of my clubhouse, right?
And like even in like games and like anime, like there is like also this separation between like the women who like certain games, like they like otome games, or they like, you know, Dragon Age because of the romance. No, I like Dragon Age because of the story. Right.
I like it for the romance too, though.
Romance. I mean,
That's
Iron
totally,
Forever, but
that is totally fine.
I thought it was a dating sim with dragons, but there weren't dragons.
What I was going to add in, I think in fandom, because that's a big part of my life as well, I think sometimes what I see happening, I do totally agree it's changing, is when we get to a point where the change is starting to be something tangible and we see it, and I'm thinking of Star Wars, and there starts to be a huge pushback. And I think of my kids. Like, if I say, okay, that's it, guys, like, I've got to limit the amount of TV, whatever. There's going to be a time when that behavior of, like, being angry about it spikes. But we have to hold the line. And I think that's, in some ways, where we are with fandom, with geekdom. We have to not step back.
Yeah.
Not going anywhere. It's my entire
Absolutely. And I want to come back to what Ash was saying about when you started talking about video games. I'd love to hear more about that.
yeah, it's just like, so I have been a lifelong gamer my entire life, and I play a lot of like first-person shooters, you know, and like over the last 5 years, I've seen like this change. Whereas like I went from like, when people found out that I was a girl playing these first-person shooters, they would like come after me, and like now like I'm in a raid with nothing but guys in Destiny, and it's perfectly normal. And I'm like, man, I wish I had grown up with this when I was like 13, 14 years old, and everyone was telling me, oh, you shouldn't be in here. This isn't your space. And like now it's like, it's becoming like a space for everyone, and I really love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's like a slow like evolution, but like like Danika said, we have to hold the line, and we have to just like keep proving that we do exist in the same space, and like it doesn't matter like what geek cred we have, like just liking something means you're a geek, means you're a fan of it. Like you don't have to prove like in what episode did Spock do something in Star Trek. I mean,
Oh my God. Yeah. I worked in a comic book shop in 2000, and that's just like a steady stream of people coming in like, but do you actually know X-Men? Like, did you actually read Blue Team? And it's like, yeah. And I'm not answering your questions either because they're obnoxious. Yeah. you do the stare, and then they go away.
and like people learn differently, and they absorb like media differently, and so you might not remember a fact, but you remember like a character arc, or you remember the color of someone's shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different ways that we like learn and absorb and like interact with media, and like they can't all be compared the same way.
Well, I also think that we're in this space where we recognize that, thank you, that we recognize that we're sharing something, and it's about the joy, and it's about the community, and it's not about ownership of the thing, right? It's not like I am the best fan.
Yeah,
I am number one.
Oh,
like, no,
there
it's
was
like,
a period of time though, like where like somebody was like, I'm the only person who's part of this club,
Right.
and I am ultimate fan. Like,
It's like, well, good for you, isn't it lonely at the top?
but I mean, I don't know about you guys. My geekdom started with the Backstreet Boys in like 1997. Thank you. But it was this like bananas thing where like I learned HTML so I could make a website. Like I was in like chat rooms with like GeoCities. I was in like chat rooms with like other Backstreet Boy fans, and it was so community based. So like fandom for me, and I think it's born out of that like teenage girls love to love the thing that they love, and they love to talk about the thing that they love. So it's always been about community. Like nothing is as fun when you're doing it on your own, and I think that's a difference in us being able to like have access to a community now through the internet.
I'd love to hear more about your experience, specifically navigating kind of like the geek community and fan spaces like conventions, and just also in your own work. Like, how has that been? Tell me, have you ever been tested for your geek cred?
yeah.
I think like everyone in the geek community has, like whether they're male or female, like everyone has been like, oh, have you really seen that episode? You know, and then you lie sometimes, be like, yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, of course. And then you go and you watch it later that night, and you're like, oh, I didn't like that episode. But yeah, I think everyone's been tested on like their geek cred, because I mean, like it's not a competition, but like it's a way of I don't know, of like proving yourself and saying, oh, I'm like this awesome, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, and you can tell the difference between somebody just asking you if you watch something,
Exactly.
and somebody who's like interrogating you and has ulterior motives. Like there's a.
So I had one experience. I was actually interviewing for a job like early on, like years ago, and I thought it was like, it was like a fellow geek who was a guy. It was a horror show, and he was like, oh, you like horror? Because it's like, I am a black woman. That is kind of surprising to people. I'm like, oh no, I love it. And so he just kept asking me all of these questions, and I kept answering them, and sometimes I would correct him, like when he would get a fact wrong, and then I didn't get the job, and I found out from my agent that like he got it out of him that like he felt threatened. In my knowledge, I'm like, but no, it's a horror show. Don't you want someone on your show who fucking knows the genre?
Yeah.
Like, why would you not have that person?
And it's somebody who doesn't like being corrected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just remembering that I once had an experience where someone tried to test me on like rom-com fandom. Because I wrote my first novella was like a geek girl rom-com, and I was writing this like this script adaptation, and I think I was at like a film festival party or something, and I remember thinking, is this just like a white man thing? Like, you can't help yourselves. Like, so like this guy was talking to me, and he's like, oh, what are you here for? What are you writing? And I was like, I'm writing this rom-com. It's a geek girl, like whatever. And he was like, oh, rom-com, got it. Okay, so what is this line from? And it was like the, I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy. And I was kind of like, okay, first of all, that's the most obvious one. Everybody knows that one. You're not special. And second of all, I was like, because I think I was just like, oh, haha, and I walked away. But I was like, do you have like a whole pile of rom-com questions? Like, is that
Ready. It's like
I know. Do you have like, and also, do you have this for like every fandom? Like, you're just ready with like the test questions. But it was so weird to me because that was one space where I had not expected to be like tested. And I was like, is this just how it is everywhere? Like, everywhere I go, I have to like take a pop quiz to prove.
It does feel a little bit like it is, though. I mean, I've started responding, like, it happens on Twitter all the time. Like, I write about sci-fi and fantasy and you know, have a little bit of a presence. And whenever now people come into my mentions are either explaining jokes or explaining shows or whatever, I'm just like, well, okay. Doesn't matter what they say. Like, that's the response. I'm not engaging anymore with people who are like, well, did you know in issue 79 in 1973? I'm like, I don't care. That's how much I don't care.
So do you feel that geek culture is inclusive or becoming more inclusive? Do you think it's changing?
Yeah, in different ways, definitely. I think, well, I mean, actually, in the overall scope of things, it is.
Yeah.
There's still subsections where it's, you know, there's resistance, I guess. There's pockets of people that you have a really unpleasant experience with, but then, you know, overall, it's just kind of a joy. Like, meeting everyone and just like having this discussion, it's different. It's now.
Yeah, and to Danika's point, it's like as it's grown, it's like we've all, I think you were also saying, it's like we've all found our own communities. Mm-hmm. And so if there's like the white guy club who's like, you can't come in, it's like, I don't have to come in. Right. Treehouse over there. I don't need you.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to tell my friends your clubhouse sucks.
Does he even have a fire pole?
I mean, I think I kind of have been starting to feel like, it's kind of like what Preeti was saying about how it's almost like there's a separation, and that I think that separation is good because I think the sort of older toxic fandom is hopefully smaller and less cool, and you know, we're kind of coming together in our own way in a more inclusive fandom that sort of drowns them out. There's a wonderful book called Ship It by Britta Lundin, which is like a fandom rom-com. It's about a girl who writes nerdy fan fiction, and she gets a chance to go to a convention about her favorite show. And what I thought was really cool about that book was it kind of illustrated how there is like this new guard that is very pro-fan fiction, pro-romance, like the things that people who have been more marginalized sort of value, which I think were sort of like made fun of or dismissed before. You know, like women started Star Trek fandom because they were writing Kirk, Spock, Slash, you know. And at first I think that was like very dismissed, but now it feels like it's kind of celebrated and embraced. So what I loved about that book was it sort of showed how now this newer community that's more inclusive and more celebratory and more about people who like things coming together is sort of the new guard like taking over. And then she also had this part where there's like the old guard, which are like all these white dudes who love this one video game and come to this one panel and keep asking the question of like, have you really played this game? Do you know about this level? Blah, blah, blah. But they're obviously like the totally uncool ones.
I love what you said about marginalization, and I think that is something that it's a learning tool for that toxic community where, and again, it's as things change and they perhaps have to discover what it's like not to be the only one in the spotlight, not have the entire story about them. I think that's good, actually. So it's funny, just online, you and I were speaking a little bit about Rose's character, but like as I watched some of that burning going on online, I was thinking, yeah, how does that feel, guys? You know, like, because I've loved Star Wars since I was a kid, you know, and so this for me was really awesome. It's interesting, though, like that's a hard lesson to learn firsthand, I imagine. So I don't know. I think that's good.
Like one of my friends runs one of the like oldest like Ghostbusters fan sites. Like you know, he's been on the internet forever. That's so cool. And yeah, he's very cool. But I remember like when the new one was coming out, he was getting like all these comments from guys, and like this one guy posted a comment. He was like, well, I think it's great that there are female Ghostbusters. I think that's totally cool. I have nothing against that. But I'm a little disappointed because there's no one for me to cosplay as. And, and my friend was like, what do you think people who are not white men have been doing for years? Like, I was like, I made up a whole fanfic story about how I was the only female Ghostbuster, and I moved to New York, and Egon Spengler fell in love with me. I don't know. But I feel like those of us who aren't like what people think of as the traditional fan have been doing that forever. We always project ourselves into stories. We always have to sort of like squint or find ourselves in the margins or make up a whole story where we are actually present. And so to have that flipped around where now this white man was like, there's no one in the new Ghostbuster for me to cosplay as. And my friend was like, there's been like many people for you to cosplay as for decades, so I think you can deal.
I feel like we're setting this up as a little bit of like two sides, which I brought up, but there's learning within the inclusive community too happening, right? Like I really love it because I feel like I'm learning every day of my own biases and my own perceptions that need to be pushed. And so the marginalizations within our community are having a moment where we get to speak up and be like, you know, there was, when The Last Jedi came out, there was a lot of conversation about Holdo and her relationship to Poe and both the like gender dynamics and the racial dynamics. And I just think it's really nice that we can have these conversations.
I don't know if I'm adding more, but I really loved watching, like, just from being in a shop when I was watching manga come in and change the entire framework, because it was, they have market where they're selling millions and millions of copies of comics, so they have adult women lines of comics, they have young women's lines, they have in shoujo, like everything, and then watching 8-year-old girls just sitting in the shop like reading on the
like
floor.
Shoujo or like shonen manga.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
for years.
Was my very first like fandom. I was just,
absolutely.
It transformed the way I saw media and how I interacted with it.
And when it came in, it didn't just come in and trickle in. It came in and it dropped volumes and volumes and volumes of all of this, and it changed the entire format. And it brought a lot of people in, and it was just such a cool thing to watch, and it still is a really cool thing to watch. Just manga, I love it.
No, it's great. I love seeing, especially when we're talking about new people discovering fandom for the first time. And you brought up the great point about there's this perception of fandom as a clubhouse. And there's this, I want you to talk about, like, tell me about what you think about, is there a sense of ownership, like, people saying, hey, this is my thing? Or is it possible that it can be open for anyone to come in?
That's a completely individual approach, because everybody does it when you get really obsessed over something. Look at ships. You burst somebody's ship, it's over. Like, they're coming for you. I think everybody has, like, an individual, sometimes they'll lump together in this individual obsession. But then, it's just, I feel like it's such a variety of approaches to that, like that level of obsession. But
I think transformative works kind of like bring a community together a lot more, because like my first community experience was in fanfic. It was the fanfic community, and it was on LiveJournal, and it was like swapping fics, and it was talking about our different ships, and that's how I got into fandom as a whole, was through like these transformative works that where we can all just band together and just or discuss why we like this ship but not this ship, and it helps us learn other people and what they like, and it's just, and I don't know, I love it. It's great.
That's wonderful. I'd like to hear from everybody on this particular question. So tell me about your work, and how does your experience as a fan or a geek inform what you're creating today?
Which side are we starting from?
Anywhere. Who wants to start? We can go down the line.
Well, for me, I think that it took me a long time to really kind of get the courage to start writing fiction and writing stories, and it took me a long time to get there. But I think that what I really am trying to do is to write the really fun genre stories I grew up with, but with women of color at the center. Because I feel like a lot of, like, the stories that I loved were like the fun sci-fi, there's dragons, there's superheroes, there's romance, like all of that. But it was always centered on white people, and it felt like whenever I saw a story about a woman of color, it was in a very sort of serious, literary, it was all about the struggle, like everything was very hard, it was about racism, like whatever. And while I think that we, of course, still desperately need those stories, I just want there to be more variety so that, you know, we can be Spider-Man or Spider-Pre. You know, that we can take on those roles that are so much fun and that center us as heroes and protagonists and people who do get to save the world and have fun and have romance. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to put out in the world with all of the stories I tell.
Yeah, I mean, I cut my teeth on fanfic, so everything that I write is going to have some sort of like fanfic trope in it, no matter what I do, because I like when I went to college, my English professors and my writing professors, they told me that like I could never be a published author because I wrote things that no one wanted to read. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So like I just made it my life's mission to just like write the tropes and write the things that I want to see. And growing up, I never saw like any sort of fangirls really, or like queer fangirls at all either. And so that's like those are the kind of stories that I want to tell. And I want to tell stories that are like so tropey, and I want to tell stories that, you know, have heart and also have happy endings, because like deep literary fiction is great. I love a good House of Falling Leaves or whatever it's called. But like, give me a good like Nora Ephron fantasy. I wish that was a thing. Like,
You can make that a thing.
Or like, give me a Princess Bride, like, right? Or a Gallivant. Like, just those are the things that I want. So,
I guess for me, it's always been very centered on the fact that there wasn't anyone who looked like me in when they talked about geeks or they talked about fans. Like, Indian kids were serious and hardworking and gonna be doctors and. I did not do that. So now it's, you know, with the podcast and everything I write, whether it's fiction or, you know, commentary or whatever it is, it's from the lens of being like to other Indian women and to other, you know, Asian women, that this is a space that is welcoming for you. And when we started Desi Geek Girls, it was very much like a project of love, and like I just wanted to have an hour to talk to one of my best friends and like see if people listen, great. If they don't, whatever. And we got a lot of messages from specifically young South Asian women who were like, I didn't know that there were other like Indian kids who really loved this stuff as much as I love it. And it was really heartwarming. And so that's kind of where that comes from, of like, I want to be like, you shouldn't like hide this part of you. Like, there are other people there.
That is so awesome. Okay, so for me, I started off writing nonfiction. I was doing my master's. I've also talked to you about this, CB. I was writing my master's, and I got to a point where I just like hated everything I was writing, and I thought I was gonna die. And I just, honest to God, hated it. My father died at around the same time, and quite young. And I just had this moment where I just couldn't go on. And so I remember my husband was like, you know what, I heard there's this show now on Netflix or whatever. It was like Battlestar Galactica. And I watched it up to the point, please plug your earmuffs if you haven't actually watched, okay? So Kara Thrace died, and I was like...
Wait, what?
Sorry. And I honestly felt like my dad had died again, and I sought out fandom to help me. And honestly, they were my people. Like, I have friends who I met in that fandom who have come and stayed with me in Canada. There are friends that hung out with me here at the con. Yes, like Jill. So that changed my life. And so to finish my like 400-page thesis, I would write fanfic and then do what I hated. And then I write fanfic and do it. And you know what, as I was writing, I was like, oh, like I'm actually okay at this. And I was writing like book-length stuff. And eventually that kind of led to, yeah, like what if I actually wrote a book that was just my characters? And that's really what my first YA became, was about, there's a fan and her favorite character dies. And she's like, that's it. I'm bringing him back. And that's what she does. She just rallies fandom, and she changes her world. So she makes her fanon become canon. And so that's how I got into it. And it honestly is so much better than metadata analysis. So I'm so glad I did that.
Awesome. Well, my goal is just like gender and racial, because I grew up in a very small town, predominantly white, in Missouri. And as I was coming up, it was Boys in the Hood, and like that kicked off a lot of the urban cinema for black people, and that somehow became the default of the black experience was urban, and so everyone else kind of got erased in that experience, like me. And so what I want to do with the entertainment and content that I am creating is to show that black people are not the Borg. We have a variety of experiences, especially black women who are often portrayed as still mammies or the angry black bitch, and there's no variety in how we are portrayed or see ourselves. And that was one of the things that I enjoyed about writing Misty Knight in Luke Cage. Is like she can be angry, but she has a point. It's like, because a lot of black women aren't allowed to be angry on the job. You're immediately smacked down and dismissed. And she had a vulnerable side as well, especially this season when she's dealing with, spoiler alert, she lost her arm.
What?
And also that experience where we try to be as authentic with the experience of people who are, if I'm going to say this correctly, differently abled, and bringing that to the community as well. So it's just like, I would just like for everyone to have a variety of experiences, just like white people aren't a monolith in their worldview, neither are the rest of us.
I grew up on Vertigo, but I know that what I wanted to do when I took on Shade the Changing Girl was, the formative part of me becoming an artist was when, I always read comic books, but then I got Death, the High Cost of Living, and Death, I got those books and I opened them and I was like, this is what I want my life to be. Like, I want to draw this, I want to do this. And I wanted to recreate that moment in these books, like somebody's reading it and it's just like, I want to draw comics for the rest of my life. Like, that's just one of the big, like when I hear like somebody come up and say they're inspired, that they want to, get into want to draw comics, and and I've heard it a couple times and it's just like, but that, that's one of the big major things in my head when I took on the job, because Vertigo is so important to me, and that it's become my whole life, so.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And so now we'll be taking questions from the audience. There's a microphone. If you have a question and you really, really want to ask it, you're welcome to line up at the microphone, or if you don't want to.
Bye, Mom. She's got to get in line for the masquerade tickets, you guys.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can come to the microphone. Yes, question first. Go.
Okay, so I actually have probably half a dozen questions, but I'll be polite and keep it to one. I've noticed that there's still a lot of divide, especially in certain genres of things, between the male community and the female community. Like, for instance, with games, I play like Diablo 3 and Path of Exile and all that, and so often when I enter the chat, people will make negative comments.
Oh, yeah.
Not even knowing I'm a female, but they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah.
Ballroom 20, it's okay.
It's like soundtrack is like.
Yeah, it's shaking our table.
Yeah, you're
Sorry, it's here for you. It's specifically for you.
It's like somebody stuck a quarter into the table.
So, when they find out I'm a female, they're like, oh, did your boyfriend like build your character for you? And it's like, oh, please no. Or like, especially as females, if we have a lot of ships, a lot of the males will assume we're only in the fandom because of our ships.
Yeah.
Well,
So
then why are guys into just the fandom? Like, just for the not.
And honestly, who cares what they think?
Or people who say certain shows or things can't really be fandoms because they're so popular. Like, I've gotten the Disney fandom isn't a real fandom, and I'm like, excuse me. But I guess my question for anyone who wants to answer is, like, how do you overcome those boundaries that still exist?
You kick them in the teeth. But the boundaries are imaginary.
Yeah.
Well,
They're fake.
It's a lot of behind-the-screen bravery where somebody's going to say something awful to you, as awful to you as they possibly can, because they're not in front of you. And you have to keep that in the back of your head. Like, I mean, and you will notice, like, as soon as they find out you're a girl in a game, they'll immediately go to physical insults. You must be ugly.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, but it's not what it is. And we all play games. We all are here. It's just like a default, weakness mechanism. I'm behind a screen. I feel threatened. Maybe I got headshotted, and I'm gonna insult you because that's the easiest thing, right? It's just kind of, think of it as it's pathetic. Like, it's just like, wow, that's your default answer. Like, move on.
And also, you don't owe anybody any sort of explanation about anything. Like, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them a response. You don't owe them. They're gonna say whatever they want to say. And I know it's hard. I know, people come in and say really, really horrible things all the time. I mean, you can be like, the sky is blue, and they'll be like, well, you're a garbage person, and I hope you burn in hell. It's like, they say these horrible things, and you're like, what are you doing with your life?
Also,
sorry, go
oh, no. I'm just saying, they don't deserve, if you don't want somebody to have access to you, they don't deserve access
to be in
to
your
you.
ear. Like, it's just like, and that's kind of really hard for, like, it's easy to say right now, but it's harder to be in the moment
absolutely.
and like having that vitriol aimed at you. And that's just like, it's stupid, and we should not have to deal with it, but we do, and I'm sorry that we do. And there's nothing.
Yep.
That's block and mute.
That's-
and also the entire internet is just like,
And
it's just a
don't
trash
feel
fire.
ashamed about blocking people, because people will say that, they're like, oh, that's weak. No. This is you. This is your presence.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Like, I'm a really positive just person by wiring, but there are times, like, I read something, my heart is pounding, and I'm so upset, and it's just won't even respond. Just block them.
Yes.
Just
Great.
keep your head high, do not move, and block.
Because like
strategy.
the best thing you can do is not give them a response because they want a response.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. All right, thank you for your question. Next question.
Hi, I have a question that I hope will be kind of fun. So just as an example, when I saw the Wonder Woman movie, I cried for 5 minutes after it was over, and my husband was like, oh yeah, that was a really intense ending, right? And I was like, that's not why I'm crying, because I was crying because it was the first time that I really felt like somebody had made a movie for me. And I'm curious if there are specific moments that you've had, especially with the recent sort of awareness of the need for representation, especially in nerdy things, if there are moments where you've had that feeling of like, wow, this was made for me.
I can jump in on this because I'm dressed as Rose Tico today, and so when Kelly Marie Tran, and she's a Vietnamese American, and I've never seen anyone from my community get to be in a Star Wars, and I was just so overwhelmed and thrilled, and it's one of those most powerful things. And like you said about Wonder Woman, like I finished watching the movie and was like, I'm ready to fight, I'm ready to, like, and it was like, is this how everyone feels after they watch just like a...
Yeah, I was gonna say also Asians in Star Wars, just like all the Asians in Star Wars. And I think like I remember when we were watching, I went to the Force Awakens with my like Geek Girl gang, and I was sitting next to my friend, and we're both like mixed race Asians. And Jess Pava, who's in the ending battle, who's played by Jessica Henwick, is Happa. And so when we saw her, we were both like elbowing each other like that. And then we both got so tense because our immediate assumption was she was going to die. And so like we were so happy when she didn't die. But it was like just that one small moment. She's not in the movie a lot, but it felt like finally sort of being acknowledged in Star Wars. And then when they continued that with like Rogue One and then Rose Tico and Paige Tico, I think like just seeing those faces in that enormously popular franchise that all of us have loved since we were children was a huge deal. And for me, also one of the most fun parts has then been like how Asian Twitter like gets really excited whenever like I posted a picture of they put up like this big mural of the two guys from Rogue One in the Star Wars store in Disneyland, and I posted just a photo and I said like Asians in space, and it got like so many Asians were like yeah, like it got like all this action just that one image because something about just that one image was so powerful.
I'm just gonna say Miss Marvel.
Yes.
Kamala Khan. That's it.
For myself, it was when I watched Mad Max Fury Road. Furiosa, I just like really connected. And sorry guys, I'm gonna totally TMI you with health stuff. So like I have a heart condition, so not visible, but even here, trucking up those stairs, I can feel it. I'm like, am I gonna pass out before the top? Just to see someone who has some sort of disability and just like kicking ass, sorry, I'm not supposed to swear, just really kicking butt.
We can swear. That's ridiculous.
There's a warning. So yeah, I loved that. And that one, I watched it and I immediately wanted to watch it again. And I just felt that story.
For me, it was seeing all of these like animated series that are that are queer now. Like during the election season was also when Yuri on Ice is coming out, and I was like watching that, and like when it got to like certain episodes, I just started bawling because I'm like, this is the way this is going to go now. And then like Steven Universe, and I was crying during that wedding. Like I was like, oh my god. And then like yesterday when Chihiro came out as gay, I was like, oh my god, this is stuff that's actually happening now. Like pinch me. So it was wonderful. It's been wonderful.
All right.
I think,
Go ahead.
really quickly, my big one is like I am a fan of the movie Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. Was obsessed with that movie when I was a teenager, and it was the first time. It's like, I don't know if you know, but black people do not have the best track record in horror movies. Usually, we are the first to go, unless you go back to Night of the Living Dead, and it was the first movie where a black woman saved the world.
Yeah.
And that had a profound effect on me.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a section of manga that we got in after shoujo. It's called josei, which is the adult women's manga. And I've always read like American comics, and Vertigo felt close, but then I read some Erika Sakurazawa, and it was just like, this is real approaches to real adult life as women, relationships, super frank, and it was just like, wow, this is an option. Like this was made and this has an audience. Like that means that we can make this audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry we don't have time for more questions, but if you do want to find us, we will be in the sales pavilion autographing. You can buy our books. Don't leave just yet, because I want to take a picture of all of you all amazing people for the Twitter. And if we can quickly, we'll start with Marley. Can you please tell us where we can find you on the internet and also at the rest of Comic-Con?
My Twitter name is Kitty Coffee, and my Instagram name is Kitty Coffee Kitty, because those are things I like. And I draw Shade the Changing Girl. I'm going to be tomorrow from I think 3 o'clock to 3:30. I'll be doing a live drawing at the DC booth, and then from 3:30 to 4:30, I'll be doing a signing at the DC booth. And I'm also doing the Secret Loves of Geek signing tomorrow morning. Yes.
Yay! Yeah. Awesome. Akela Cooper. My Twitter handle is Akela Cooper, as well as my Instagram. I have another panel tonight at 6 p.m. for the genetic mutations. Will we become metahumans? And I will be walking around the floor more than likely for the rest of the day. Or you can find me in line for the masquerade ball with my mom after this.
The best
If you just search Danika Stone with a K, you'll find me. Like, I'm in the first thing. And there's like a million Danikas, so always my hashtags or my usernames are like Danika_Stone and stuff like that. So just search me.
My Twitter handle is Run with Skizzers, Skizzers, because that was my AIM screen name. And I didn't know how important Twitter was going to be. You can also find me on the Desi Geek Girls podcast or the Sci-Fi Strong Female Characters podcast.
Can I jump in? I forgot I was supposed to tell you where you can find me. I'm on from reader to author at 6 p.m. I think it's room 9.
I am running around after this, but I'll be at the signing and then running around the convention center.
You can find me on the internet at @Poston, underscore with Instagram, just @Poston on Twitter, or you can just Google me. I will be at the Quirk booth from 2 to 3, just handing out books, selling things, talking to people. So if anyone wants to come and fangirl with me, just hit me up. Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter at Sarah Kuhn, it's just my name, or I just started kind of on Instagram, Sarah Kuhn Books, because someone else took Sarah Kuhn. They're not even using it. And then it's like a blank page. And then tomorrow I'm on another panel called Love is Universal, which is a romance panel I think it's at noon, and then afterwards we'll be signing.
Oh, and today there's a rally for Rose Tico at 2 p.m. and you should all go.
It's at the Hilton. And if anyone else is Star Wars, please come. You can find me on the internet at cb-lee.com. I'm on Twitter at author_cblee. And later today we'll be walking to the sales pavilion. You can follow us if you want to have more questions or just come to our signing or buy books. Please buy books and support these amazing authors and writers and artists. And I'm also going to be on the Boom panel later today because I'm writing Ben 10, which has just been announced. And so that will be in room 24 ABC. And that's where you can find me. Oh wait, one more picture. Can you all just be like, Comic-Con? You all are amazing. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.